They weren't supposed to be here. When the sensor technician aboard the Zarnathi dreadnought Volkor reported a human warship on long-range scans, his voice didn't crack from confusion. It cracked from raw, unfiltered panic. Not fear, not concern. Panic. As if he had seen the Grim Reaper himself reach through the void and point a cold, skeletal finger at their ship. Commander Crixel had dismissed it at first. Another glitch. Another sensor ghost. The human fleet had been pushed back 6 sectors from the Eltrax void. They couldn't possibly have made it this far, and not undetected. Then the second report came in. Then the third. And by the time the 5th ship in the Vanguard confirmed the same signature, an old Terran battlecruiser class, no known transponder, running cold but powered, he stopped speaking. No orders, no logic. Just silence, because Crixel knew the stories weren't stories. The humans weren't just violent. They were unpredictable, relentless, psychotic, some claimed. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to destroy, to break, to unravel empires by force of will alone. And they had a reputation earned not in numbers or advanced technology, but in psychological warfare, stubbornness, and what the Zarnathi called the dying laugh. It was what made them truly terrifying. The Terrans would smile as they bled out in fire, dragging enemies with them, laughing into the void. The last war, 60 years ago, had ended with a silence so loud it echoed across 5 quadrants. The humans didn't sign treaties. They didn't negotiate. They simply stopped. And that made the galaxy even more afraid. Now, as the vast Zarnathi Armada, over 3,000 ships strong, hung in formation over the burnt remains of the Gralian colonies, the echo of a single human warship's signature hit them like a sledgehammer. Fleet coordination collapsed, command lines fractured. Some captains gave orders to reposition, others turned their ships away, stammering half-lies to their crews about a tactical retreat. Some went quiet altogether, frozen in place. And far beneath all that chaos, in the command ship's lower deck, a young recruit named Tharek stood beside the observation panel, heart slamming in his chest. He saw it, a distant shimmer in the black. Faint, low profile, old Terran design, rectangular, no lights, no emissions, just drifting. But there. "What are we supposed to do?" Tharek whispered to his superior, a grizzled veteran named Shun. Shun didn't respond. He just stared at the shimmer for a long, cold minute, then said something no one expected. "Hope they don't notice us." Above them, on a dozen bridges across the fleet, command officers argued, calculated, panicked. Crixel finally broke silence on open fleet comms. "All units brace for possible engagement. Human vessel detected. Stand by for priority contingency code." The signal cut out. Static. Then a new signal took its place. It was audio only. No identifier. No encryption. Just one line, spoken in Terran Standard with a slow, gravel-thick voice. "You forgot about us." And the entire comnet exploded into noise. Officers screaming, pilots scrambling. Some ships powered shields. Others began activating jump drives, aborting missions. The human ship hadn't fired a single shot. It hadn't even moved. But across 3,000 alien warships, the one thing no one wanted to admit was now a screaming truth. They were terrified. Not of a fleet, not of a superweapon, but of a single ship, and worse, what might still be inside it. You could feel it in the hull, not vibrations, not movement, dread. A low, crawling sensation like your bones were about to shatter. Except nothing touched you. No impact. No force. Just the awareness of something being wrong. Tharek stood frozen by the viewport as the dark mass of the human vessel slowly grew larger in the distance. It hadn't moved, not even a nudge, and yet it felt closer, like it was staring back, like it had eyes, and breath and hate. His superior, Shun, had gone silent. Eyes distant, lips cracked open like he wanted to speak but forgot how. The bridge of the Volcor had descended into a stifling hush, broken only by erratic beeping from consoles and the occasional hiss of shifting hydraulics. Commander Crixel was gone from the comms, gone from the bridge. Rumors were already spreading. He'd locked himself in his quarters. Or maybe he'd done something worse. Other ships in the fleet were reacting in chaos. One Zarnathi cruiser, the Geltar, had already jumped out of system, abandoning position without orders. Another, the Varn's Hook, fired a barrage of ion flares into space. Bluffing, perhaps, or trying to force the human ship to show its hand. But the human ship didn't respond. No shields, no weapons online, no shift in course. It just floated, silent, like a gravestone. And still, somehow, it held the attention of all 3,000 ships in the Zarnathi Armada. Tharek could hear snippets from open comm channels, other commanders screaming, ships asking for clarification, backup, evacuation. Someone said they were trying to ping the Terran vessel. Someone else said that was suicide. But then the voice came back. Same gravel-thick human voice from earlier. Same dead calm. 3,000 ships, and none of you knocked first. The channel snapped off again. Shun suddenly moved. He pulled Tharek away from the window like he was shielding him from radiation. "You don't look at it," he said, almost growling. "You don't." "But it's just a ship," Tharek stammered. "No," Shun said, "it's them." Back in the old war, humanity wasn't the largest fleet. Not even close. The Zarnathi had 7 times their numbers. The triumvirate worlds had firepower that dwarfed the human naval capacities. And the Arlek Syndicate had stealth ships that made Terran scanners obsolete. But humanity fought differently. They didn't win by superior numbers. They won by turning the battlefield into a psychological meat grinder. They didn't just aim for military targets. They broke morale. They jammed systems with their own language, coded in insults and psychological warfare. They hijacked communications, using voices of the dead to whisper into the ears of enemy pilots. They left wrecks booby-trapped with recorded screams. They learned alien languages faster than expected, only to spit them back in mocking tones across every frequency. They pushed their own soldiers to extremes, giving them nicknames like Void Walkers and Laughers. They chemically suppressed fear. They were known to fly damaged ships on suicide runs not for tactical advantage, but to prove they'd do it. It worked. Whole fleets abandoned regions without a fight. And when the Terrans vanished from the war without explanation, nobody celebrated. They were just gone. And now here it was again. A single echo from a supposedly extinct war machine. The ship was old. Everyone agreed on that. Probably pre-synthetic hull, no modern upgrades, no visible weapons array. But the signature was unmistakable. It was the Thanatos, last seen at the Battle of Enver's Cradle, officially destroyed. But even that was a lie, because no wreckage had ever been recovered. Fleet Admiral Zulkar of the 7th Zarnathi Corps tried to rally the ships. His voice blasted through fleet comms with that same command tone he had built his career on. "All vessels, disengage from panic protocols. This is an outdated vessel, likely abandoned. We do not retreat from ghost stories. Confirm war readiness. Prepare to board." Tharek heard the words. So did Shun. So did the rest of the Volcor's bridge crew. But no one moved. Board it. No Zarnathi had set foot on a human warship since the end of the last war. The last known boarding operation had ended in 64 bodies, all Zarnathi, found torn open from the inside. No signs of Terrans on board, just cameras. Footage showing one man laughing into the lens before slamming his own head into a bulkhead, repeatedly. until his skull cracked. The ship had self-destructed before they could recover anything else, and now Zulkar wanted to board the Thanatos? Madness. But 2 vessels detached from the forward line, smaller, nimble reconnaissance craft, not heavily armed, but fast enough to approach and escape if it came to that. One of them, the Zirul Beta, made contact first. The second, the Orkalan 8, kept distance, scanning. Open comms streamed their feeds to the Armada. Tharek and Shun watched from their console. The hull of the Thanatos was covered in what looked like corrosion, but the scans didn't match any known decay. It wasn't rust. It was organic residue, like something had grown on the ship and died. Multiple times. The Zirul Beta closed in. Still no response from the Terran ship. Then the recon pilot, a young female officer named Nari, activated docking clamps. "Ship is unpowered," she said. "No life forms detected. Initiating hull breach." A pause, then a click, then silence. Tharek leaned forward. Nothing. No response. Shun's lips tightened, then static, then a scream. No video, no footage, just a scream like something was clawing through Nari's throat, wet, gurgled, then a voice, not hers, not human either, something between a growl and a whisper. "Still watching?" And then Zirul Beta exploded. No weapon discharge, no warning, just gone. The Orkalan 8 spun away in panic, its pilot breathing heavy on comms. "She didn't die in the blast," he said. "I saw her face. She was already dead." The Armada reeled, and then it happened again. The voice, broadcasting from the Thanatos, wideband, to every ship, every deck, every bridge. Same voice, low, male, unshaken. "You left the fire burning. We just walked back in." Admiral Zulkar tried to give another order, but it was too late. 10 ships jumped out, then 20 more, then 50. Not coordinated. Panicked. Back on the Volkor, Krixul reappeared on the bridge, eyes bloodshot. He was holding a small hollow emitter, shaking in his hand. He played the file without a word. It showed the last known footage from the Battle of Enver's cradle. Human soldiers, what looked like only 30, storming a station holding 600 Zarnathi defenders, and winning. Not through tactics, not even through firepower, but fear. The humans didn't duck for cover. They screamed, they charged. One of them got set on fire and kept running. Another had both legs blown off and still crawled forward, laughing. When the station collapsed, the last audio file recorded from their unit was a man whispering into his comms, "You'll forget this day, until we remind you." Krixul turned it off. "This ship isn't alone," he said. Tharek blinked. "What?" Krixul nodded slowly. "It's a scout, a memory, a test. They want to see what we'll do." "What if we ignore it?" Tharek asked. "They'll come anyway." Shun spoke again for the first time in minutes. "They never fight for territory, or for resources. They fight when they're bored." Hours passed. The human ship never moved, and still, the Armada bled itself. 1,000 ships gone now. Some jumped to safety, others detonated, crews mutinying to avoid capture. By cycle's end, less than 900 ships remained in formation. And only one question remained. What did the Thanatos want? It didn't attack, it didn't hail, it just existed. And that somehow was worse, because it meant they were watching. Again. And this time, they weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to remind the galaxy why you don't ignore monsters just because they're quiet. By the 7th hour, silence had become more dangerous than war. There were no more messages from the Thanatos, no more cryptic threats, no sudden explosions, no more screams from doomed recon teams. The ghost ship just sat there, motionless, cold, ancient, as though it had already delivered its message and was simply waiting to see what the Zarnathi Armada would do next. But that silence did something far worse than violence ever could. It made everyone start to turn on each other. The Vulkor's bridge had fractured into 3 factions. Commander Kriksul, who had finally re-emerged from his quarters, now stood isolated, his voice hoarse from shouting failed orders. The younger officers, the ones too young to remember the last war, were beginning to panic openly, whispering of mutiny, escape pods, or defecting to the Arlek Syndicate. And then there were the veterans, like Shun. Men who had seen what the humans did in the old war, who didn't panic, because they already knew this was over. They had the dead look in their eyes. Acceptance. The 1,000-yard stare of soldiers who'd already made their peace. Tharek didn't know which side he was on. He just knew he wanted off the ship. The comms buzzed. Another transmission, this time from the Zerak Thorn, a long-range command vessel that had taken up a cautious observation position behind one of the fractured asteroid belts nearby. Admiral Zulkar's voice came through again, but this time, he didn't sound angry. He sounded small. "We've attempted remote scans. Telemetry is corrupt. Visual data is degrading. Every automated drone that gets within 10 kilometers of the Thanatos malfunctions and sends back this." A moment later, Tharek's console lit up. A video feed, flickering, black and white, distorted like it had passed through layers of interference. It showed the Thanatos from a distant angle. But the shape was wrong. The hull seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. Then something moved. Not on the outside, from within. The ship was shifting, its panels flexing subtly, like muscles tensing under synthetic skin. It didn't have lights, but something inside it glowed, a slow red pulse, like a dying heartbeat. And then the drone's feed cut to static. Zulkar came back on. "None of our scientists can explain it. We thought it was derelict." "We were wrong. It's growing." No one spoke on the Vulkor's bridge. Kriksul turned slowly to his crew. "We've been trying to measure this thing using our science, our logic, our rules, but it's not playing by them." Tharek finally found his voice. "What is it, sir?" Kriksul looked at him with something between horror and awe. "I think it's not a ship anymore." In the mess halls and engine rooms of the remaining fleet, strange reports began spreading. Hallucinations. A pilot from the Zelverin classer reported seeing figures moving in his peripheral vision. Figures in human naval uniforms, just standing in the corners, mouths open but not speaking. Another crew member claimed his own reflection mouthed different words than he spoke when looking into a mirror. Someone else claimed to hear breathing inside the walls. Shun pulled Tharek aside privately after the 3rd such report came in. "You ever hear of the Ghost Protocol?" Tharek shook his head. "Last war, human psychological warfare doctrine. They'd send a ship ahead, cloaked, quiet, sometimes with no crew. It would drift into enemy systems and just exist. And every hour it stayed there, the enemy would start to lose their minds. Ships would misfire. Crews would turn on each other. Officers would report seeing dead comrades, hearing voices. One fleet, an entire Arlek formation, ended up killing each other without the humans ever firing a shot." "But how?" Tharek asked, voice cracking. Shun's stare was cold. "Doesn't matter, because it worked." Tharek leaned in, whispering like even the air might be listening. "So you're saying this ship, the Thanatos, it's not here to fight?" Shun's jaw tensed. "No, it's here to watch us destroy ourselves." By the 9th hour, another 100 ships had abandoned the formation. Some drifted aimlessly, others exploded during mutinies. One entire squadron, The 14th Drakkar Line attempted a mass surrender. They hailed the Thanatos, requesting terms of peace. And the ship finally moved. It didn't speak. It didn't send back a message. It rotated, just slightly, just enough to aim its front toward the 14th Drakkar Line. And then every single ship in the squadron lost power. No blast, no energy weapon. They just died. Tharek watched the readouts on the fleet display. All systems flatlined. All life signs ceased. No debris, no escape pods, just floating tombs. Commander Krixul stood motionless, fists clenched. "They tried to surrender," he said flatly. "They tried to reason." Tharek whispered, "What does that mean?" Krixul didn't look away from the screen. "It means the humans don't want surrender. They don't want victory. They want obedience." At the 11th hour, someone broke. A young officer named Jaren, barely older than Tharek, pulled a pulse pistol and shot his superior in the chest during an argument over escape protocol. He didn't try to run, didn't try to explain. He just dropped the weapon and stared at the floor. "Don't you hear it?" he mumbled. "Hear what?" Tharek asked. Jaren looked up, eyes glassy, smile twisted. "They're already inside." Krixul ordered him thrown into confinement, but the med officers already confirmed what everyone feared. Jaren's brainwave activity was altered. Like he'd been programmed, rewired. And then came the kicker. He wasn't the only one. Across 5 more ships, similar reports surfaced. Officers speaking in strange phrases, pilots walking into airlocks, crew cutting power to shields, saying, "The lights must go out for them to arrive." It was becoming clear. The Thanatos wasn't just a ship. It was a signal, a carrier, a weapon that attacked not with lasers or nukes, but with ideas. And those ideas were spreading. Zulkar made his final broadcast at the 12th hour. "This fleet is lost. We're no longer in command. I advise all vessels with jump capability to scatter. Don't report home. Don't draw attention. Let this thing burn itself out." Then he detonated his own ship. No warning. Just light. And then silence. The Volkor didn't move. Krixul didn't give the order. Shun didn't ask for it, because they all knew now any movement was a mistake. You jump away and they might follow. You engage and they'll break you. You try to talk and they'll listen, but you won't like what they say. The human ship began transmitting again. Not audio this time, video. But it wasn't a threat. It was an old Earth broadcast. Grainy, black and white. A man in a suit sitting behind a desk, speaking into the camera. "Good evening," he said. "This is your reminder." The image flickered. Cut to images of ancient battlefields. Tanks, bombs, fire, not alien, Earth's own wars, then newer ones. Human soldiers boarding alien vessels, screaming, blood, panic. Then nothing. Just one final message, blinking in red text across every screen in the fleet. We were quiet. You forgot. We're awake now. And we remember everything. The first explosion didn't come from a human weapon. It came from inside the fleet. One of the mid-tier ships, the Rakas Elon, broke formation, spun its nose down, and rammed full speed into the engine core of a battleship 3 times its size. No warning, no message, no justification. Just a suicidal impact that tore both vessels in half. Before anyone could react, 4 more ships followed. By the time someone screamed into fleet comms, "They've infected the crews!" it was already too late. Dozens of ships were turning on each other. Some locked down their engines and self-destructed. Others opened fire at nothing, venting atmosphere, killing their own. Not under orders, not under logic. Pure panic, pure madness. Tharek stared at the fleet screen on the Volkor's bridge, eyes wide, hands cold and numb. The once proud formation of Zarnathi vessels had turned into a slaughterhouse. Ships spun out of control, weapons discharged indiscriminately. Flares and missile trails painted chaos into the stars. Some of them were attacking the Thanatos, but most had no target at all. "Status report," Krixul barked, trying to cling to command. No one responded. His voice no longer mattered. His rank was dust. Shun stood in front of the observation panel, arms folded behind his back. "I told you," he muttered. "They're not here to fight us. They're here to make us fight ourselves." "Why?" Tharek asked. His voice cracked, the words barely coming out. "Why would they do this? What do they want?" Shun turned, expression unreadable. Vengeance. Or maybe this is how they win. With silence. With terror. With reputation. He pointed at the screen. "That ship hasn't fired a single shot. But look what it's done. Look at us." Tharek did. Out of the original 3,000 ships, barely 400 remained operational. The rest were dead in space, destroyed, drifting, or abandoned. And the human ship, still unmoved, still cold. But now something was coming out of it, not weapons, pods, small, cylindrical, silent. At least 50. They drifted away from the Thanatos, directionless, unpowered like debris. But Krixul understood what was happening. "Boarding units," he whispered. "They're sending boarding units." A tactical officer tried to scan them. The system crashed. A different officer tried to shoot them down. Weapons control locked. "No," Shun said flatly. "We're not jamming. They are. And not with tech." "What then?" Shun gave him a look that made Tharek's stomach twist. "With presence." The pods floated past the perimeter ships like ghosts. No shields activated, no defense systems engaged, as if every ship's AI simply refused to acknowledge them. Then, one by one, they attached. Not with clamps, not with magnetic tethers, they sank into the hulls, merged like cancer. And then the real horror began. Screams filled the internal comms. Not from one ship, from dozens. "Something's on board!" "They came through the walls!" "They're not human, they're something else!" And beneath the screaming, laughter, slow, hollow, male voices, chuckling in the background of death. And then the voices began speaking in Zarnathi. "You forgot the sound of your own fear. We died in the dark. Now you will too. What you fear is not what we are. It's what we're becoming." Reports poured in. The boarding units weren't just human soldiers. They were altered. One surviving crewman, broadcasting from a crippled cruiser, described them as wearing their own deaths. Suits covered in bone. Helmets designed to look like skulls. No visors. Just glass painted black, so no one could see their faces. And they didn't shoot. They didn't shout. They just walked down the halls, slow, methodical, tearing through Zarnathi flesh like paper. One by one, the ships went dark. Tharek turned to Shun, whispering, "They're not soldiers anymore." "No," Shun agreed. "They're symbols." The Volcor was next. The proximity alarm shrieked as one of the pods, silent and silver, latched onto the port side. Tharek felt his lungs freeze. The same cold tension from earlier returned, like something ancient had reached out through the void and touched the back of his neck. Krixul ran toward weapons control. "Seal every deck, power internal defenses." But nothing worked. Turrets failed to deploy. Hull breach shutters jammed. The AI spoke once, then went silent. Then the lights died. And the laughter began. Tharek ran. Not out of cowardice, out of instinct. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even brave. He was alive, and that was the only thing that mattered now. Shun followed close behind him, pulse pistol drawn, checking every corridor. "Where are we going?" Tharek gasped. "Escape pods," Shun said, "assuming they haven't shut them down." The hallways of the Volcor were filled with shadows now, deeper than any darkness a power failure should cause. They moved like liquid, like smoke, like something watching. Crew lay dead across the floors. Some hadn't even been touched. They'd died from fear, heart failure, seizures. Others had scratched their own faces off. Tharek turned a corner and stopped short. A figure stood in the next hallway. Tall, human silhouette, helmet like a skull, armor that looked grown, not forged, no weapon in its hands, just standing, breathing. It didn't move toward him, it didn't speak, it just watched. Shun raised his pistol, but it jammed. Tharek pulled him back. "Go," Shun growled. "Now!" They ran. Behind them, the figure didn't follow. It didn't need to. At the escape bay, they found one pod functional. Barely. Tharek jumped in. Shun hesitated. "This won't help," he said. "If they want us, they'll find us. Wherever we go." "Then why run?" Tharek asked. "Because maybe that's the point," Shun said, stepping in. "They want us to carry the message. They want someone to survive." "To warn others?" Shun shook his head. "No. To spread fear." The pod launched, and behind them, the Volcor died. From orbit, Tharek looked down at the broken fleet. Less than 100 ships remained, most of them crippled, others possessed. And in the middle of it all, the Thanatos began to move. Just slightly, just enough to point itself outward, toward the nearest wormhole gate, toward the next system. The message was clear. We're back, we're coming, and this time, we're not stopping. The escape pod coasted silently through the cold void of the Talari drift, its interior soaked in the quiet hum of failing systems and the shallow, haunted breathing of 2 survivors. Tharek sat strapped into his seat, blood crusting the side of his face from an earlier fall, his eyes wide, unmoving, not blinking. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, not since the Volcor vanished behind them in a flash of silent death. Shun sat across from him, holding a data slate in one hand, a pulse pistol in the other. He was older, but somehow less shaken, or maybe just used to it. He'd seen death before. Real death, not the clean kind, the kind that sticks in your lungs and rewires your soul. "Navigation's shot," Shun finally said, voice low. "Pod's drifting on backup trajectory toward Yaris Belt Station. If it's still there." Tharek blinked. Once. "They didn't follow us," he said, almost as if disappointed. Shun didn't answer right away. "They don't need to." That silence returned. Not a peaceful silence, the kind that presses on your chest like a slow poison, the kind that makes you feel watched, even when alone. Tharek finally found his voice again. "Are they even human anymore?" Shun looked up, and for a long moment he didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a man about to admit something terrible. "No," he said. "Not like us. Not like anything." Tharek shook his head. "But what are they?" Shun leaned back, tapping the pulse pistol against his thigh. "You ever hear of Project Oblivion?" "No." "Classified human operation, last war, codenamed Dark Latch." The idea was simple. If humanity ever faced extinction, they'd send one final fleet, one last silent vanguard, untraceable, undetectable, no diplomats, no surrender, no prisoners. Just ghosts. The Thanatos was the first prototype, Shun confirmed. They said it was destroyed at Enver's cradle, but that was a lie. It disappeared, went dark, and the galaxy assumed they'd lost control of it. But they didn't? No, they finished it, perfected it, and then they waited. Waited for what? Shun's eyes locked onto Tharek's. For us to forget. Tharek looked away. He didn't want to believe it. Couldn't. But the way those soldiers moved, their silence, their patience, their surgical cruelty, it wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was method, calculated, engineered. The worst part? It had worked. The escape pod limped its way toward Yaris Belt Station, weaving through the crumbling remains of asteroid fragments and abandoned mining platforms. The station was visible from a distance, still powered. But dark. No ships in orbit. No transmissions. Too quiet. Shun guided the pod manually the last few kilometers and docked with one of the external airlocks. They boarded with weapons drawn. Not because they expected humans. Because now, anything that moved felt like a threat. Yaris was empty, not destroyed, just abandoned. Lights flickered in slow pulses. Monitors blinked with corrupted feeds. The air recyclers still functioned, and gravity was stable, but there were no signs of life. They passed through the commerce deck, where stalls once bustled with alien traders, now rotting in silence. Food half-eaten, drinks tipped over, cards scattered on tables where no hands remained. "It happened here," Tharek whispered. Shun nodded. "Maybe a pod made it. Maybe just one. That's all it takes." They reached the central command hub. Shun pulled up the last station logs, broadcast logs, internal security footage, sensor data, all corrupted, except one file. A short video, no metadata, no timestamp. Shun played it. The screen showed a hallway, familiar from earlier in the war. An officer stood alone, facing the camera, mouth twitching, eyes bloodshot. He looked Zarnathi, but changed. Off. He spoke in Terran standard. "They don't speak, they don't sleep, they don't stop. They remember what we forgot. They weren't just made for war, they were made for what comes after." The screen went black. And then the station lights died. Tharek and Shun froze. No hum, no flicker, just silence. Then movement. A sound down the corridor, not heavy, not stomping, bare feet, slapping softly against metal. Shun raised his pistol. Tharek gripped the wall, breath stuck in his throat. The sound came closer, then stopped. And a voice, male, gravel-worn, cold, spoke in Terran again. "You ran far. You survived. That makes you useful." Tharek trembled. The voice was close, on the other side of the corridor. "Spread the fear. Let them know. We're not back for peace, we're back for balance." Shun fired. Pulse rounds lit the hallway. No hit, just an empty corridor. But the voice remained. In their heads, not through the speakers, in their heads. They left the station, as fast as they could. Shun manually forced an emergency beacon to activate on launch, a broad-frequency broadcast set to loop one message. Human warship sighted. Multiple confirmed hostile contacts. Do not engage, do not approach. They are not who they were. The pod pushed deeper into the Yaris sector, headed for the only functioning outpost left in the quadrant. Port Salvox, an independent trade station built by a neutral cartel of non-aligned worlds. The place didn't take sides. If there was a system left in the galaxy that would listen to reason, it was there. Or so they thought. 3 days passed. The journey was long, long enough for Tharek to stop flinching at every sound, long enough for his thoughts to return, and long enough for him to start dreaming. And the dreams weren't his. He dreamed of bone-armored soldiers walking across ice-covered cities, of children crying in tunnels, of ships screaming in binary, of Earth cracked open like an egg, of laughter in the dark. Shun didn't sleep. When they finally reached Port Salvox, the place was buzzing with activity. Ships from across the quadrant were docked, freighters, smugglers, patrol vessels, even old war-era cruisers. News had spread, but not the truth. As Tharek and Shun stepped off the pod and into the registration hall, they could already hear the rumors. A rogue AI ship, probably malfunctioning. Some backwater system hyping up ghost stories. Old Terran tech drifting around, big deal. No one understood. Not yet. Shun stormed into the central council chamber, guns holstered, data slate in hand. He slammed it on the table. This isn't a myth. We were there. We saw it. We barely escaped. The council, a mix of species from different trade syndicates, looked unimpressed. You're telling us a single human ship did all this? One asked. It wasn't the ship, Tharek said. It was what came out of it. They're not human anymore, Shun growled. There's something else. Something made in war but evolved in silence. You expect us to panic over one ship? Tharek stepped forward. His voice was low, sharp, cold. No, I expect you to panic over the fact that it's not alone. The room went quiet. Shun tapped a command into the slate. Projected into the center of the chamber was a fleet schematic. Not of the Thanatos, of a network. 6 known human ghost ships from the last war, once thought lost, all missing, all unaccounted for. And then, a new signal, live, blinking, coming from the outer rim of the station's own sector. Human frequency, undeniable, and it was moving toward them. One council member stood. Evacuate the station, now! Another screamed into the intercoms. Port Salvox descended into chaos in under 10 minutes. Tharek stood by a viewport, watching, waiting. And then he saw it, just a speck at first, then clearer, a familiar shape, the Thanatos, still cracked, still dark, still breathing, and behind it, 2 more, same design, same silence, same purpose. The fleet wasn't just awake, it was coming home. Port Salvox was never meant for war. It had no heavy cannons, no dreadnought-class defenses, no trained military personnel, just merchant vessels, smugglers, traders, and aging private security crews hired more for crowd control than battle. But now, as 3 human ghost ships emerged from the black-like silent gods drifting on wings of steel and sorrow, even the grimiest black market smugglers started praying to things they didn't believe in. The Thanatos led the formation, its broken hull somehow more menacing than any pristine warship. Its 2 siblings, the Persean Edge and Oblivion Veil, followed in slow unison. No formation markers, no comms, no escorts, just quiet, suffocating intent. Inside Port Salvox's control center, Shun and Tharek stood behind the central viewport as alarms blared across every deck. The emergency evacuation lights cast long red shadows on everyone's faces. They didn't even change course, the chief controller muttered, hands trembling. They didn't respond to hails. They just arrived. That's how they work, Shun growled. They don't come to talk. They come to watch what you do when the knife is already against your throat. Tharek couldn't take his eyes off the display. Why here? This isn't military. This isn't strategic. There's nothing worth taking. Shun looked at him with grim understanding. They're not taking anything. A pause. They're leaving something behind. 300 escape shuttles launched in the first hour. The wealthiest syndicates were already gone, vanishing into hyperspace while the rest of the station devolved into madness. Civilians packed into cargo bays like livestock, trampling each other for a chance to get off the station. Still, many stayed. Out of fear, out of pride, out of doubt. Some just didn't believe it. And that's exactly what the ghosts were waiting for. The Thanatos stopped its approach just outside the station's defense perimeter. Its lights flickered once, then died. And then something launched. Pods, not metallic, not machines, organic. They pulsed like hearts, gliding through the vacuum toward Port Salvox like drifting jellyfish. Their surface shimmered with membranes instead of armor. And where they struck the hull, they melted in. Security forces responded immediately. They sent drones to intercept. None returned. They fired anti-boarding flak. The pods dodged in impossible patterns, not by speed, but by knowing where the shots would land. "Get me visuals on impact points," the control chief screamed. But the feeds went black. Across 6 decks, the same message began repeating over the intercom in a slow, whispering human voice. "The future does not come in war. It comes in silence. We do not conquer. We convert." Tharek and Shun rushed to one of the security checkpoints. The guards had sealed the blast doors, unsure whether to engage or hide. Then came the first transmission from within. Camera feeds blinked to life. They showed the halls. Figures walked them. But these weren't bone-armored soldiers like before. They looked human, unarmored, unarmed, dressed in simple gray robes with black bands around their eyes. They walked slowly, peacefully, no weapons, no urgency. One turned to a camera and smiled. Then the feed died. "What the hell is this?" Tharek asked. Shun's jaw locked tight. "It's the next phase." "What phase?" He didn't answer. Then they heard the screams, but not the screams of dying, the screams of changing. Deep inside Deck 3, the boarding parties weren't killing. They were touching. Anyone they reached, anyone who didn't resist violently, was marked. A simple hand on the face, a whisper in the ear, and then they changed. Physically, biologically, flesh shifting, minds slowing, eyes turning gray, their voices dulled to whispers. They didn't fight. They didn't speak. They just followed, converted, one by one. Tharek watched the security feeds in horror as crew members transformed in seconds. A Zarnathi female clutched her chest, screamed as her fingers elongated, bones reshaping. Her scream twisted into a laugh, a mechanical, hollow, human laugh. She rose calmly and walked to the next person. Then did the same. "Stop them," Tharek whispered. "We have to stop them." Shun turned away from the screen. "You can't kill ideas." The truth hit Tharek like a shipwreck. They weren't an army anymore. They weren't even invaders. They were a virus, a mimetic, psychological, and biological weapon engineered not just to terrify, but to replace. This wasn't about war. This was about erasure, not of species, but of identity. Tharek and Shun joined a group of armed smugglers barricaded near the cargo lifts. There was no chain of command anymore, just people who didn't want to become whatever the hell was taking over the rest of the station. "What do we do?" someone asked. "Fight them?" Shun shook his head. "You can't fight what you can't understand." "Then run?" "They let you run." "What?" Tharek spoke now, his voice cold and certain. "They're not trying to chase us. They're trying to send us out, like infected blood." "You saying we're carriers?" Shun nodded. "Fear is the first vector. The rest comes later." "Then what? What's their endgame?" Tharek turned to him and said the one thing no one else wanted to admit. "They want to make us like them." On Deck 7, something new happened. A figure emerged, not armored, not faceless. He looked human, completely. Gray eyes, pale skin, thin smile, short hair. He stepped into the promenade like a man arriving at a dinner party. People froze. Some pointed weapons. He didn't flinch. He held up his hands. "I'm not here to harm you." His voice wasn't threatening. It was inviting. Soft. Even kind. "I'm here to help you survive." One of the smugglers fired. The shot hit the man in the chest. He staggered, looked down, laughed quietly. "I understand." Then his body peeled open like paper folding wrong. And what came out wasn't a man. It wasn't anything that had ever been alive. Back in the command center, Shun watched the conversion rates tick higher. He tapped into long-range comms, began transmitting across every known frequency. Tharek stood beside him, watching the message go live. "This is a warning," Shun said. "If you hear this, do not come to Port Salvox. Do not send fleets. Do not send aid. Burn this location from your records. Do not remember it. Do not say its name." He paused, then added, "We failed to forget, and now they've remembered us." Outside the station, the 3 ghost ships remained idle, like gods watching a temple burn. But the Thanatos had opened a port, and from it, more pods began to grow. Thousands, like seeds, spreading into the dark, each one carrying not soldiers, but invitations. They were down to 6 now. 6 living, breathing, unaltered souls clinging to the shattered edge of the cargo level beneath Port Salvox's broken reactor core. Tharek leaned against the cold metal wall, his pulse weapon low on charge, his shirt soaked in blood. None of it his, but that didn't matter anymore. Blood was just a color now, a warning sign that someone had been close to them. Shun stood near the flickering interface panel, trying to reroute power to the blast doors. His fingers moved with method, but Tharek could see it in his eyes. The exhaustion, the knowing, the slow acceptance. "You hear that?" Tharek asked, voice thin. Shun paused. He did. Not footsteps, not alarms, singing, distant, hollow, beautiful. Voices in unison, like a choir buried in the walls, humming a human lullaby none of the Zarnathi had ever learned. "They're getting closer." Shun nodded. "It's a signal, a pacification layer." "A what?" Shun sighed. "Before the transformation becomes physical, they sedate the mind. The music slows cognition, dulls threat response. Makes the fear easier to replace with obedience." "You're saying it's part of the process?" Shun didn't answer. He didn't need to. Of the 6 survivors in the corridor, 1, a Yaren mercenary named Tolk, had begun muttering nonsense 2 hours ago. He'd stopped blinking, stopped reacting. His skin had gone pale and cold, but he wasn't dead. He sat in the corner now, humming the song, not quite in rhythm, but close. "Do we put him down?" asked Rika, one of the few remaining smugglers, a lean, sharp-tongued female with more scars than credits to her name. Shun looked at Tharek. Tharek looked at Tolk, and then back. "No," Tharek said, voice low. "If they wanted us dead, he'd be gone already. They're leaving him like that, to make us watch." Tolk smiled, then spoke. His voice was not his own. "They don't want to kill you. They want to teach you how to stop being afraid." Then he stood, walked into the nearest vent, and disappeared. No one chased him. Back in the remnants of the station's central database room, Shun managed to slice into the inner layer of the Thanatos' transmitted signals. Most systems had crashed under exposure to its psychic echo, but a few backup nodes remained active. And that was when they saw it. A map, a network, a grid, dozens of systems marked in red, not attacked, not destroyed, converted. Tharek stared at the growing list of systems with dread. Gorath Prime, Ilthus Station, Verdane's Belt, Jura Colony, Outer Worlds Research Hub, 17B. None of them had reported back. None had called for help. They'd been silenced. "What are they building?" Tharek whispered. Shun tapped through the transmission logs. And there it was, a final file, corrupted, fragmented, but legible. A message from the old war, a human log, audio only, a voice like rusted iron and sorrow, whispering, "Project Oblivion." Termination was never the goal. The war taught us that species survive not by force, but by assimilation. Memory, identity, autonomy. These are viruses. The cure is unity. We will show them the peace that exists when fear is no longer an option. The universe will not be conquered. It will be corrected. Rika stood behind them, pale, wide-eyed. That's what this is? Correction? Shun nodded grimly. No more empires, no more wars, no more resistance, just sameness. Tharek clenched his fists. They're turning the galaxy into themselves. Worse, Shun said. They're turning it into a mirror. The singing grew louder. Decks above collapsed one by one. Not from explosions. Those had long since ended. The structure wasn't being destroyed. It was being reshaped. Organic matter fused with metal. Lights pulsed in biological rhythms. Vents breathed mist that smelled like Earth's oxygen. Surveillance systems began humming human lullabies. The station was becoming a human structure, but not the kind built in shipyards. A living machine. A womb. Then it happened. From the core access elevator, a figure stepped out. Tall, clean, not armored, not grotesque, familiar. He looked like Tharek, exactly like him. Same face, same eyes, same scar, except his irises were steel gray, and his smile endless. Don't be afraid, the duplicate said. We've made you better. Tharek raised his weapon. His hands shook. Shun whispered, Don't shoot. That's not meant to fight. What is it? A choice. The double walked closer. You can live in fear, he said, calm, or live in clarity. Your pain ends the moment you accept it. We don't end you, Tharek. We set you free. Free from what? The double leaned in. From yourself. Tharek fired. The bolt passed through the figure. It wasn't real, just light. A projection. It laughed. I understand. Fear is persistent, but it's not permanent. And then it vanished. Behind the walls, movement began. Hundreds of new forms. Some human, some not. All walking, chanting, humming. You said they were ships, Rika whispered. But they're not ships. Not anymore. Shun turned to her, eyes heavy. They're cedars. Each one carries the strain, the memory, the voice. Tharek realized it then. The Thanatos, the Oblivion Veil, the others. They weren't ghost ships. They were carriers of a human idea so corrupted, so purified by the fire of war, that it had replaced biology itself. Not evolution, not religion, a new truth, burned into the cortex, fear, overcome, identity, erased, obedience, total, not from control, but from want, because after enough fear, enough trauma, enough war, peace becomes seductive, even if it means losing everything, even if it means no longer being who or what you are. The team fell back to the last functioning escape ship in Dock 3. A merchant freighter half-fueled and barely operational. Shun made the call. Launch blind. No destination. No calculated path. Just away. Tharek hesitated, staring back at the changing station as the ship launched. Behind him, Port Salvox began to glow, not with fire, with light, warm, pulsing, peaceful, and the singing? It followed them into space, through the walls, into their sleep. Not loud, just there. As if something was gently asking them, why fight what you already are? The freighter limped through deep space, its hull cracked, fuel cells flickering, and comm systems overwhelmed by radiation and corrupted frequencies. It wasn't supposed to fly this far, just a merchant hauler, stripped down for local cargo routes. But right now, it was their only lifeline. Tharek sat in the forward observation seat, staring into the endless dark. He hadn't spoken in hours, not since Port Salvox faded from view, receding into nothing, lit up like a distant sun, a peaceful sun. But he couldn't forget the song. It still played in his mind, soft, warm, comforting. That's what scared him the most. Shun stood behind him, working at a maintenance panel with slow, tired fingers. The old soldier's hands trembled, not from fear, but from knowing he might have made it out just to die later. "We need to transmit the warning," Shun muttered, "even if it doesn't save anyone." Tharek turned his head. "Transmit it where? Every system with a name is either silent or singing." "We find a place without a name," Shun said. "Out on the fringe. A colony too remote to be worth their time. Maybe someone out there is still stubborn enough to fight." "Fight what?" Tharek asked bitterly. "Fear, memory, peace. You don't kill an idea, Shun. You surrender to it, or you die resisting it alone." Shun met his eyes. "Then we die human." A few decks below, Rika was dying. Slowly, quietly. Her breath came in wheezes now, lungs scarred from exposure to the biofog released during the station's fall. She hadn't told anyone at first. She'd fought through it, pushed herself too hard, until she collapsed in the cargo hold, coughing blood and whispering parts of the song. Tharek sat with her now, kneeling beside the cot, watching her fade. "Don't let it take me," she whispered. "You're not going to die," he lied. She smiled. "I already did. Back there, on deck 7, when I watched that boy smile as his skin peeled off and he thanked them." She gripped his arm, suddenly strong. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said. "I'm afraid of forgetting why I was afraid." Then her hand fell limp, and her lips parted to sing one final time. But no sound came. Just a breath. Then nothing. Tharek helped Shun place her body into the disposal chute. They didn't have the energy to give her a proper ceremony. The dead were piling up across every system. What difference would one more body make? But it mattered to them, because it meant she hadn't joined. She hadn't smiled that awful, peaceful smile. "Not yet." "Someone has to know," Tharek said. "Someone out there, someone still listening." Shun nodded and activated the last long-range emergency beacon, a pulse coded in a half-dead dialect of Zarnathi military signal, something that only deep-range colonies might still pick up, if they were watching. "Warning human fleet. Non-hostile, non-negotiable engagement. Conversion. Total loss of self, do not approach. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is the last defense." Then he sent it. Out into the void. Maybe no one would hear it, but it was the last truth he had left to give. 3 days passed. No ships, no signals, just that song, still faint in the background. Sometimes Tharek heard it in the engine hum, other times in the way the lights flickered, even in the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He wanted to scream, to cut it out of himself, to rip the memory away. But Shun stopped him. "You're still yourself," he said. "As long as you hate it, you're still human." "But what happens when I stop hating it?" Shun didn't answer, because that's the question no one wanted the answer to. On the 5th day, a signal pinged back. Not a human one. Not Zarnathi either. Something older. Primitive. A backwater colony in the Krythan Reach. Unaligned. Forgotten. They responded with 6 words. "We see it too. Come quickly." That was it. Coordinates followed. The 2 remaining men adjusted course. The Krythan Reach wasn't a place you visited. It was a place you ended up. Low radiation, no trade, just dust, ice, and old mining outposts. And now? Refuge. When they arrived, the colony wasn't much. Just a string of domes stitched together by glass corridors and buried generators. Maybe 200 people total, most of them born there, never left, never needed to, until now. Tharek and Shun were escorted to the main biodome. There were no weapons, no uniforms, just faces. Tired, weathered, but not yet singing. The colony head was a woman named Myra, aged, sharp-eyed, unafraid. "We've been watching the stars darken," she said. "One system at a time. Lights blinking out, traders vanishing. Messages repeating the same words." "You understand what's happening?" Shun asked. Myra nodded. "We do. We always knew they'd come back." Tharek frowned. "Then why aren't you running?" "Because we've seen what running leads to," she said calmly. "Fear may delay them, but it doesn't stop them, and we won't be reshaped, not here." Shun narrowed his eyes. "You think you can fight them?" Myra smiled. "No, but we can remember." She led them down into the old mines, deep below the colony, and there they found it, an old wreck, human, from the First War, not a ship, just a drop pod, crashed, rotted, sealed in ice, and inside, one body, long dead, preserved, and smiling. Myra stood beside it. "This was their first scout," she said. "He came before the Thanatos, before the silence. We found him, studied him, dissected what he became." "And?" Tharek asked. "He wasn't human anymore, not even close. His DNA had rewritten itself using psychic exposure, emotional trauma. Somehow they turned fear into code, a weapon that rewrites flesh and thought alike." Shun stared at the body. "Then we were doomed from the beginning." Myra shook her head. "No, not doomed, just unprepared." Then she pulled back a sheet, revealing a chamber. Inside it, another Tharek. Same face, same structure, but lifeless. Empty. "We've been working on resistance," Myra said. "Not military, cognitive. We found ways to block the conversion sequence. It doesn't cure the infection, but it slows it, resists it." "You're making clones?" Tharek asked, horrified. "No, we're making mirrors." She looked at him. "You've seen them copy you. The face, the voice. But what happens when they look into a mirror and see something looking back that won't change?" Shun stepped forward. "You want to fight them, with themselves." Myra nodded. "They evolved fear into peace. We're going to evolve peace into defiance." Later that night, Tharek stood under the dome's transparent roof, watching the stars. He saw it again. Faint, distant, a glimmer of light that pulsed once, then went dark. Another system gone, another world corrected. But here, the song was fading. He could still feel it in his chest, but it didn't control him. Not anymore. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, then whispered, "We remember." And that's when it finally stopped. 4 years later, the galactic map is smaller now. Half of it glows red, the other half glows white, and a tiny flicker remains blue. Krythan Reach, unconverted, unbroken, but watched. Always watched. Some say the humans don't attack it because they know what's brewing there. Others say they're waiting to see what happens when the virus meets resistance. No one knows what the humans are anymore. But they left one last message, broadcast across all channels, in every language, every dialect, in one voice. "We are not at war. We are at peace, but peace like you can be improved." The future no longer belongs to empires. It belongs to ideas, and in the darkness between stars, one final war is beginning. Not for territory, not for freedom, but for what it means to remain yourself. They thought Earth was finished. They thought we were broken, scattered, starving, without ships, without shields, without a single damn chance in the galaxy. And maybe we were. When the Zero's fleet arrived, they didn't even bother to send diplomats. No demands, no broadcast, just silent warships drifting into our orbit like vultures over a corpse. They scanned us like we were a carcass to dissect, already assuming the autopsy. To them, Earth was just one more dead planet on a long list of conquests. I was standing on the broken roof of an old comms station in what used to be Western Canada, nothing but cracked steel and half-melted antennas all around me, when I saw their ships break the clouds. You'd think fear would be the first thing to hit. It wasn't. It was fury. The kind of fury that grows when you've watched everything you ever cared about burn. I'd seen my home city get vaporized in the first wave of their invasion 2 years ago. No warning, just fire from the sky. My brother went missing in the northern colonies. My father took a plasma shard to the spine and bled out while I held his hand. I buried them both in the ash. And still they thought Earth wouldn't fight back. They thought because we lost our fleets, our satellites, our government, that we lost our spirit. Idiots! I activated the old relay under the station. It groaned like a dying animal but still responded. We didn't have interstellar comms anymore, but we had something else. Buried deep beneath the mountains, in old bunkers, in the mines, in the shadows. We called it the Ember Protocol. It wasn't a strategy. It was vengeance with a pulse. See, when the first colonies fell, humanity didn't panic. We planned. Quietly, silently. We began building, not ships, not diplomacy, not rescue plans, weapons, and not the kind they expected. The kind you bury in the crust of the earth, that drink geothermal energy and sleep for years until someone foolish enough thinks you're defenseless. The Zeros were about to find out what that looked like. The moment their ships dipped low over the major cities, New Chicago, Eurasian vaults, and the shattered coasts of Africa, the sky lit up red. I watched in silence as the old satellites we'd abandoned burst into action, not transmitting, not fleeing, but targeting. They weren't made for communication anymore. They were made for death. 3 went down in the first 5 minutes. Not ours. Theirs. From the underground silos, coil cannons rose like monsters from the grave. Ancient tech fused with raw human madness. They weren't fast, but they didn't need to be. They hit hard. You could see it from space, they said later. The way Earth's crust opened in fury. Energy pulses ripped through the atmosphere, aimed with pinpoint hatred. The Zeros had never faced anything like it, because they didn't understand humans. They understood war, yes, but not spite, not revenge, not the kind of rage that turns a dying race into a cornered animal willing to tear your throat out with broken teeth. I strapped on my exo-rig, patched together from scavenged military gear and old mining armor, and descended into the valley where one of the first impact sites had been recorded. The wreckage was still burning, and the air was thick with ionized ash. But I wasn't alone. Others were already there, men and women like me, broken, scarred, armed with more hate than hope. We didn't salute. We didn't speak much. But we all knew why we were there. We'd spent 2 years looking up at the stars, watching our homes be burned from orbit, thinking it would never end. Now it had. And now that they were on the ground, now that they were bleeding, we'd make sure they never left. We moved through the wreckage like ghosts, silent, calculated, always watching the skies. The remains of the Zero's warship were still burning, a half-mile-long slab of alloy and alien tech torn open by Earth's defensive grid. The smell was thick, melted metal, ozone, scorched flesh. No one flinched. We were used to it. Beside me was Grant. Older than me, maybe 45, ex-miner turned soldier after the fall. His face was marked by a deep plasma scar running from ear to jaw, his left eye replaced by a salvaged recon lens. He didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. "They'll send scouts," he muttered, voice like sandpaper. "Check who's still breathing. Maybe they'll send drones first. Either way, we move fast." I nodded, scanning the tree line. We were on the edge of what used to be Jasper National Park, though you'd never know it now. The trees were blackened stumps, and the air was filled with that dry hum that always came after alien tech crashed into the planet. Something about the radiation. Made your teeth hurt if you stayed too long. We weren't alone out here. Other squads had picked up the signal. Ember Protocol wasn't just about orbital weapons. It was also a call to arms. Anyone who could fight, anyone who could stand, was expected to rise. The Zeros thought they'd caught us divided. That was their first mistake. The second? Assuming we still played by rules. I moved through the smoldering trench of wreckage, pulse rifle tight in my grip. The gun was ancient, held together by a prayer and duct tape, but it fired, and that was enough. The first Zeros I saw was pinned under part of the ship's hull. It was still alive, barely. Its exosuit had crumpled inward, crushing its chest cavity. Transparent blood leaked from its mouth, bubbling in panic as it saw me approach. For a second, I hesitated. It looked scared. Not in a human way, not desperation, but confusion, the kind a predator feels when it realizes it's not the apex anymore. I aimed and pulled the trigger. One shot. Clean. Grant said nothing. Just moved past me and deeper into the ruins. No one buried alien dead anymore. No one studied them. We'd done that in the beginning, when we still believed this war could be won by understanding. Now we knew better. The Zeros weren't conquerors. They were exterminators. We'd found the evidence. Entire colonies wiped, not enslaved. They didn't want resources. They didn't want diplomacy. They wanted silence, empty planets, clean space. And Earth? Earth was too loud. So now we screamed back. As we pushed into the interior of the downed ship, the temperature rose. The wreck was venting heat like a wounded animal, burning everything it touched. We moved carefully. Hostile tech could still be active. Then we heard the first scream. Not alien, human. Grant and I stopped cold. The others, about 6 of us in total, all hardened from war, turned with us. The sound came again, echoing through the ship's dark corridor. Help! Please, anyone! I didn't even think. I moved, fast, down the corridor lit only by pulsing red emergency lights from the Zero's damaged systems. My boots clanged against the floor, echoing. I raised my weapon, every nerve on fire. And then I saw her. A girl, maybe 18. Dirt and blood smeared across her face, her clothes barely intact. She was locked in a containment pod, the alien metal sealed around her like a coffin. Her hands pounded weakly on the clear surface. "Please," she croaked. Grant came up behind me and cursed under his breath. "How the hell?" I scanned the pod. Human tech interface, fused into Zero's wiring. This wasn't a rescue. This was a test site. "They've been experimenting on her," I said quietly. Rage building in my chest. She's not the only one either. We started opening pods. There were 12 in total, all with survivors. Some alive, some not. The ones who still breathed were in bad shape, malnourished, scarred, traumatized beyond reason. Whatever the Zeros had been doing to them, it wasn't medical. It was research, probing, stripping down what made us human. One of the men, older, skin blistered from exposure, grabbed my wrist as I tried to help him sit up. They wanted our minds," he whispered. "Our pain. Said it made us unpredictable." I met Grant's eyes. We'd heard rumors of this, of the Zeros studying emotion like it was a disease. They didn't feel the way we did. No love, no grief, no vengeance, just cold efficiency. We were anomalies to them. Threats because we didn't break the same way. They were learning, trying to understand the thing they feared, and that made them dangerous, more dangerous than we'd realized. We called in evac for the survivors. Old transport skiffs retrofitted for stealth glided in under cloud cover. The pilots didn't ask questions. They just loaded the broken and the breathing, then vanished back into the mountains. But before they left, I took something from the wreck. A drive, small, black, glowing faintly. It pulsed with alien code, but it was hooked into the human containment pods. Whatever was on it, it had answers. And right now, we were starving for those. We took the drive back to base, a shattered military installation buried under 60 feet of rock. There was no front gate, no walls, just a mine shaft that looked abandoned to anyone flying over it. But inside? Inside was Hell's Forge. Humans from every region worked in brutal unison, repairing weapons, forging bombs, modifying alien tech into something useful. No leaders, no ranks, just purpose. The moment we entered, the room fell quiet. Grant handed off the drive to Mara, our top slicer. She was young, mid-20s, but a demon with code. She wore a patch over one eye and walked with a limp from a drone strike that took out half her squad. Never smiled. Barely slept. She plugged it in and stared at the screens for 20 minutes before speaking. "It's not just research," she said finally, voice cold. "They weren't just studying human behavior. They were simulating it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They've been trying to copy us, create algorithms that predict human resistance, behavioral maps, emotional timelines. The whole drive's full of combat scenarios, simulated rebellions, betrayals, even martyrdom loops." I felt my chest tighten. "They're building a playbook," Grant said grimly. "One based on how we feel, not how we fight." Mara nodded. "And there's something else. One of the simulations. It shows an attack. Massive fleet movement. They're coming back." "When?" 6 days. Silence hit like a hammer. 6 days. We'd barely survived the first wave. If they came again, with new tactics, with better understanding of how we think, we might not survive it. That night, I sat alone in one of the empty bunkers, staring at the stars through a cracked ceiling panel. I didn't believe in peace anymore, or hope that had died with my family. But revenge? Revenge was simple. Revenge had rules. I lit a cigarette, smuggled, stale, bitter, and let the smoke fill my lungs. They wanted to learn about us? Fine. Let them learn what it really means to push humanity into a corner. Because when we're backed against the wall, we don't beg. We bite. And I was going to make sure the Zeros remembered Earth as the one planet that didn't just fight back. We made them bleed. We didn't sleep much after the intel came in. 6 days. That's all we had to prepare for another wave. Only this time, they wouldn't make the same mistakes. They'd seen what Earth could do. The satellites, the Ember Protocol, the ground resistance, and they were coming back smarter. Mara decrypted more of the Zero's simulations the next day, and what she showed us made my blood run cold. They'd mapped out our emotions. Literally. They had graphs and algorithms detailing when grief would turn into vengeance, when fear became courage, when hope tipped into madness. They weren't just studying our tactics anymore. They were studying our soul. And that meant one thing. They were afraid. Afraid of something they didn't understand. And fear made them dangerous, unpredictable, just like us. We gathered every able body we had. Soldiers, civilians, scavengers, smugglers, anyone with hands, a weapon, or a reason to fight. There were maybe 7,000 of us left in the Rockies, spread across old military bunkers, mines, and hidden settlements. Broken people, hardened by years of survival. And now we had to hold the line. The command center, if you could call it that, was just a deep tunnel where we laid out maps, built makeshift displays, and tracked movement with salvaged satellites and hand-marked reports. "We hit them before they land," Grant said, pointing to an old launch schematic. "Draw them into our upper atmosphere, then burn them out with coil cannons and orbital debris fields." "And if they get through?" asked Mallory, a resistance sniper whose entire squad had been vaporized 3 weeks ago. She still wore one of their dog tags around her neck like a noose. "Then we make Earth a hell they regret walking into," I said. She didn't smile. None of us did. We weren't heroes. We weren't soldiers anymore. Just survivors, sharpening our blades and counting down the clock. Day 2, we began digging trenches through the old Denver ruins. What was left of the city was jagged glass, scorched steel, and ash. The Zeros had hit it in the first wave. Thinking it was still a command hub, it wasn't. But we made it one now. Underground, the Ember teams worked overtime. They were the real monsters of the war. Not in a bad way, not exactly, but the kind of men and women who enjoyed what they did a little too much. Engineers who'd stopped designing bridges and started crafting death machines. Chemists who brewed poisons strong enough to rot alien tissue in seconds. Programmers who rewired Zero's drones to attack their own. One of them, a guy named Vetch, thin, twitchy, eyes like broken glass, showed me something in the lab. "Ever seen a quantum fracture mine?" he asked, grinning like a madman. "No." He held up a small metal sphere. "This baby opens a mini-rift in spacetime, localized, just enough to turn anything within 2 meters into soup." I raised an eyebrow. "Tested it? On a squirrel. Poor bastard never even squeaked." He laughed. I didn't. "Get it ready," I said. "We'll need it." Day 3, we got a signal. Not from Earth, from them. It came in scrambled, warped through their alien frequencies. Mara decoded it, ran it through 6 translators, and what came out was chilling. "Surrender will be accepted. This is your only offer." No voice, no name, just silence after. "They're bluffing," I said. "No," Mara said, eyes scanning more data. "They don't bluff. Not unless they're unsure." Grant snorted. "Good. That means they're second-guessing." "Or adapting," Mallory said. "That's when we made the choice. We weren't waiting. We would go first." Day 4, the strike teams deployed. 10 units, each carrying stolen Zero's tech and Ember-forged weapons, were flown out in cloaked transporters. Their mission: hit any Zero's scout vessels, sensor relays, or forward command units hidden in orbit or buried on Earth's surface. We knew the chances of them coming back were slim. They went anyway. I watched one of the transports lift off, engine whispering in the dusk air, lights off. Inside was Bowers, a former teacher-turned-guerrilla fighter. His daughter was killed in front of him during the Second Purge. He didn't talk after that. Just fought. Before they closed the doors, he looked at me and gave a nod. Not a goodbye. Just a promise. That night, I couldn't sleep. My hands shook. The adrenaline never stopped. I walked the base perimeter alone, passing groups of people trying to find peace in the last hours before hell came back. One boy, couldn't have been more than 16, sat by a fire, holding a rifle too big for his arms. He stared into the flames, not blinking. "First fight?" I asked him. He nodded slowly. "They took my sister. I wasn't there to stop it." He didn't say more. Didn't need to. There were thousands of stories like his. I handed him one of my sidearms, old, reliable, engraved. "She was your blood," I said. "Make sure they remember it." He took it with both hands, holding it like it was made of gold. Day 5. The scouts came, tiny, fast, silent, like insects made of metal and hate. We picked them off with high-frequency disruptors and magnetic mines. The bodies fell into the forests and burst like rotten fruit, but we knew that meant the fleet was close. Too close. Mara pulled me aside after intercepting another signal. "They've adapted our orbital code," she said. "They cracked the Ember relays." I cursed under my breath. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe." It wasn't enough. Not to move people, not to hide. So we made a new plan. We stopped hiding. The final night before impact, I sat with Grant in the old comm tower again, just like the day they arrived. We passed a bottle of whiskey someone had pulled out of a bunker cache. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he looked at me and said, "You think anyone's going to remember us?" "Depends," I said. "If we win, we'll be myths. If we lose—" He nodded. Ghosts, we drank in silence. Then, far above us, the clouds split open, and the sky began to burn. They didn't come with the elegance of conquerors this time. They came like butchers. The sky tore open at 3:42 a.m., Mountain Time. Not that it mattered. Half the world was already awake, watching. The upper atmosphere glowed blood red as entry flares screamed across the darkness, painting streaks like fire across the stars. Hundreds of them. Not dozens. Hundreds. We didn't panic. We activated everything we had, every cannon, every missile tube, every buried gun, every drone, every suicide mine, fired at once. The Ember Protocol was never meant to win a war. It was built to make sure Earth's death hurt. And goddamn, did it hurt? The first 25 enemy ships never made it past the stratosphere. The old satellites, rigged to overload and detonate in close range, took them out in a synchronized chain that lit up the sky like a dying sun. One of our operators, a kid named Lev, shouted over the static, "They're falling! They're actually falling!" And they were. Black metal coffins crashing into mountainsides, deserts, oceans. A few landed clean, most didn't. But for everyone we dropped, 10 more followed. And they learned. Fast. By 4:08 a.m., their formation had shifted. No longer spread wide like before. Now tight, layered, shielded. They flew through their own dead, using debris as cover, adapting with each second. Their ships hummed in frequencies that made human tech stutter. Our systems flickered. Our comms faltered. But not our resolve. Not even close. I was already geared up, armored to hell in my patched exosuit, painted black with a cracked visor and a dented chest plate that had saved me more times than I could count. I carried 3 rifles, one for distance, one for chaos, and one for when all else failed. Knives strapped to my thigh, detonators across my chest. And the quantum fracture mine from Vetch. He handed it to me that morning, eyes wild. "One toss, one hole through space. Use it right." "Where do I throw it?" He grinned. "Where it hurts." I joined my unit on the ridge outside the old Denver ruins, now just broken concrete and buried explosives. The skyline was gone, flattened by the last invasion. But we had trenches, camo netting, and too many guns to count. And just ahead of us, in the distance, we saw them land. Not a graceful descent. A slamming. Dozens of ships like spears stabbing into the earth. Tall, black, twitching with power. The Zeros disembarked like insects. Thin, armored bodies, multiple limbs, skin like shifting chrome, faces without mouths. No roars, no speeches, just war. They opened fire first. Their pulses hit our outer bunkers, vaporizing them in seconds. I saw 2 men running, then gone. Just a flash of light and silence. We responded with old Earth brutality, mortars, sniper fire, grenades, railguns strapped to the backs of trucks and manually aimed by half-blind engineers. We'd taken apart every scrap of their tech we'd ever found and built death out of it. And now we used it. The air turned into a screaming wall of metal. I pushed forward through the trenches, barking into the mic. "Sector Echo, fall back and collapse the ridge. Now!" "Negative," came a reply. "We've still got wounded down it." I didn't hear the rest. Their section exploded. Gone. Just dust. I gritted my teeth and kept going. The Zeros didn't fight like humans. They didn't scream. They didn't hesitate. They moved like a single mind, shifting formations mid-fire, their energy weapons adjusting temperature and output with unnatural precision. You couldn't flank them, you couldn't scare them, but you could bleed them. Mallory proved it first. She set up a sniper nest in a collapsed parking garage and started picking them off. Headshots only. The alien armor shifted too much to allow center mass kills. By the time they located her, she'd already dropped 19. When they fired back, she didn't run. She screamed into the comms, "Tell them Earth doesn't forgive." Then silence. That was Mallory. By midday, they were on top of us. The outer lines had crumbled. Smoke filled the sky. The sun was gone. The clouds were ash and fire. I regrouped with Grant and a team of 6 others in the tunnel system under the city. We'd rigged the entire underground with traps, pressure mines, heat lures, collapsing shafts. The Zeros followed, and we gave them hell. One of them, tall, almost regal, with an aura of pure white light, stepped into the main chamber where we'd laid the trap. It scanned the room, paused, and looked directly at me. Not with eyes, with something deeper. For a second, I felt like it saw everything. My memories, my guilt, my rage. It tilted its head like it understood, and then it charged. I didn't flinch. I hit the detonator. The ceiling came down in fire and steel. We pulled out through the south tunnels, coughing and covered in dust. 2 of ours were gone, crushed. One was bleeding from the mouth, coughing up black. "Leave me," he rasped. Grant looked at me. I shook my head. We carried him out. That's what made us different. They couldn't predict that. Outside, the battle had turned into chaos. Lines didn't exist anymore. It was pockets of resistance, ambush points, survivors crawling through rubble just to take one more of them down. I saw a 12-year-old girl throw a thermal charge into a Zeros walker's engine port. I saw a wounded medic crawl 40 feet through broken glass just to drag a grenade under a scout drone. I saw humans do things that didn't make sense. Suicidal, desperate, reckless things, and I saw them work. Because the Zeros didn't understand that kind of rage. They never would. By nightfall, the ground was littered with wreckage, ours and theirs. But we were still standing. We pushed them back from the ridge. One of their carriers tried to lift off. I didn't let it. That's when I used the fracture mine. I got within 30 feet of it, dodging fire, climbing over corpses, lungs screaming, and I threw the damn thing right under the ship's belly. It detonated with no sound, just a pulse, then a void. Everything within a 10-meter radius ceased, not exploded, not destroyed, erased. The carrier shuddered, dropped, then collapsed in on itself. I stood there, staring, covered in blood, shaking. That was the moment I knew we had a chance. By the end of day 1, they'd taken the upper atmosphere, but we held the ground, and they hadn't expected that. Mara sent a final transmission that night, hacked into their own frequencies, no words, just a signal, just a name, Earth. Let them come again. Let them bring hell. We'd survived the first fire. Now we'd become it. The silence after the first day was unnatural, not the calm kind, the dead kind, no gunfire, no blasts, no screams. Just the dull whine of distant ship engines circling in orbit like vultures waiting for something to rot. We knew it wasn't over. It was never over. But that pause, that quiet, it was worse than battle, because in silence, you think. And thinking, in war, gets men killed. We spent the morning pulling bodies from the rubble. Some were whole, most weren't. I'd gotten used to seeing what war did to people, but that didn't mean it stopped cutting. There was this kid, we called him Ty, barely 17. Smart, fast, laughed like an idiot when we played cards in the bunker. Found him with half his skull missing, still holding a live grenade in his frozen fist. Didn't even get to pull it. I buried him myself, no ceremony, just dirt over blood. That was the ritual now. Grant and I regrouped at a temporary outpost built into the ruins of an old metro tunnel. Dark, damp, held together with scaffolding and desperation. Inside, Mara sat at her console, surrounded by monitors flickering with static and data feed. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were ringed red, hands twitching as she cycled through intercepted signals. "They're not advancing," she muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "They're probing, listening, running behavioral loops, trying to figure out why we haven't broken yet." "Because we don't." Mara didn't smile. "Not what the models say." I leaned closer. "Whose models?" She hesitated, and that's when I saw it. On her screen. Not alien code. Human. "What is that?" She minimized it fast. Too fast. "Just old files." "Bullshit." Grant stepped beside me. "Talk." Mara sighed. Rubbed her face like the truth physically hurt. "It's from the early Ember days. Before the protocol went live, there was a side program, Project Threshold. It was run by the Central Command back before they got wiped." I remembered Threshold. Barely. Black site stuff. Psychological warfare. Mind mapping. Emotional conditioning. "They were studying us," I said. "Not the Zeros." Mara nodded. "Trying to predict the breaking point. How much loss, how much death, before the human mind folds in on itself." "Why the hell are you looking at that now?" "Because the Zeros hacked it," she said. "I found it in their own simulations. They're using our own psychological models against us." Grant slammed a fist into the wall. "So we gave them the playbook." "Not on purpose," Mara snapped, "but someone leaked it, years ago. Someone in Central thought we'd lose anyway, so they sold it. Maybe to save themselves?" I stepped back, heart thudding. "Who?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The resistance wasn't united. Not really. Sure, we fought the same enemy, but underneath, there were fractures, factions, old loyalties. Some groups were former military, others outlaws. Some fought for Earth, others for revenge. Some just liked the killing. And now that survival wasn't guaranteed, trust was unraveling fast. Whispers started circulating that night. One of our own had sabotaged the Ember array. One of our own had leaked our protocols to the Zeros during the first fall of orbit. One of our own had blood on their hands. People started looking at each other differently. I found Grant later in the storage depot, loading mags into a battered rifle. "You believe it?" I asked. He shrugged. "In war, I believe anything." "Even that we've got traitors?" He looked at me, real slow. "We always had traitors. Question is, how far have they made it into our bones?" I nodded. We were both thinking the same thing. Command. If they'd turned, this whole war was built on a lie. The next day we got a distress ping from the northern ridge. A squad, Alpha 9, had gone dark during patrol. Standard procedure was a 2-man recon. Grant and I didn't hesitate. We moved light. Quiet rifles, camo gear, no chatter. The ridge had been quiet since the first push, which meant something had to be wrong. We found the first body by a tree line, head clean gone, no energy burn, just severed. The second was buried under branches, organs carved out, symbols burned into the flesh. Not alien symbols. Human. I crouched low, tracing the edge of the markings. Not ritualistic. Coded. Like someone was leaving a message. That's when I saw it. On the chest plate. A name scratched out with a blade. S. Vrenko. Vrenko was from one of the mountain cells. A private militia that joined the resistance only 6 months ago. No one trusted them, but no one questioned them either. Because they brought weapons. But now... I radioed back to Mara. "Pull files on Vrenko and his cell, now." Silence. Then, "You're not gonna like it." Turns out, Vrenko had been part of the old Central Command Psychological Division. Project Threshold. And his team? Not soldiers, scientists, the kind who studied emotion like a virus, the kind who didn't care who bled, as long as the data flowed. And now he was leading his own unit deep in the Rockies, unsupervised, well-armed, and out of contact. That wasn't coincidence. That was intent. We returned to base by nightfall. The mood had shifted. Paranoia thick in the air. One of the bunkers had been burned out, sabotaged from the inside, supplies missing, weapons gone, and a message spray-painted on the wall. "Pain is power. Power is truth," Grant spat on the floor. "That's threshold doctrine." They weren't just running. They were doing something big. That's when the Zeros returned, not with ships, with mimics, drones shaped like us. They wore our armor, our faces, moved like humans, fought like shadows. They'd scanned our fallen, cloned their gait, their shape, even their voices. The first time one appeared, we didn't realize until it stabbed its way through 3 guards and detonated inside the med bay. I found what was left. It wasn't human, but it had Ty's face. My stomach twisted. They weren't just adapting now, they were mocking us. Mara decoded the signal pulse the mimic used. It was linked to the simulations we'd found before. Threshold data. They were using our trader's knowledge to create new war forms. And that meant Vrenko wasn't just a saboteur. He was a collaborator. Command issued a kill order the same night. Vrenko's team was now a rogue faction, but we all knew what that really meant. Civil war. Even in the middle of extinction, even with alien fire falling from the sky, humanity still found a way to eat itself. Grant and I suited up. We weren't going to let Vrenko go underground. Not while he was feeding our worst enemy everything that made us human. Because that's what this war had become. Not just aliens versus Earth, not just tech versus instinct. It was humanity's soul versus the things we'd allowed ourselves to become. We found them in the mountain valley by dawn. 12 of them. Armed. Cold. Silent. Vrenko stepped out with blood on his gloves and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't get it," he said calmly. "They're not the enemy. You are. Your grief, your pain, your refusal to adapt." Grant raised his rifle. "You sold us out." "No, I evolved us." I fired. He didn't get another word out. We burned their camp, took back the stolen tech, found data cores loaded with behavioral simulations so detailed they predicted counterattacks down to the minute. If the Zeros had gotten all of it, this war would have ended in days. But we stopped it. Barely. And just in time. Because orbit sensors flared red as we returned to base. Mara's voice cracked over the comms. "They're coming again." Worse than before. This wasn't invasion. This was eradication. We didn't need satellites to see them this time. The sky caught fire. A straight-up meteor storm of enemy dropships poured down like the heavens themselves were sick of Earth's existence. It wasn't war anymore. It was punishment. And the Zeros meant to make it permanent.